The great chamber of the Galactic Council stood silent as Ambassador Vethel walked toward the speaking platform at its center. And every eye from 12 different species watched him move with slow and careful steps across the polished floor that reflected the light of 1,000 floating orbs above them all. Vethel was old for a Solani, his translucent skin showing the blue veins beneath in patterns that shifted with his emotions. And right now those patterns flickered with something that looked very much like fear to anyone who knew how to read them correctly. The council chamber on Axiom Prime was the most important place in the known galaxy. A neutral station built by 7 species working together over 200 years ago. And here the great powers made their decisions about war and peace and everything in between. High Arbiter Corax of the Vorn hegemony sat in the largest chair, his massive gray form covered in ceremonial armor that gleamed with precious metals. And he looked down at the Solani ambassador with the kind of bored expression that powerful beings often wear when they think someone is wasting their time. "You may speak," Corax said in his deep rumbling voice that echoed through the chamber like distant thunder. Vethel activated the holographic display behind him, and the image of a small blue and green world appeared, spinning slowly in the air for all to see. "Honored members of the council," he began, "I have spent 40 cycles studying the species known as humans, and I have come here today to deliver a warning that I believe may save millions of lives if you choose to hear it." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through some sections of the chamber, and Vethel felt his skin patterns shift toward a darker shade of blue. "The humans are young," called out Representative Mox of the Kelthani Federation, his forearms waving in what passed for amusement among his kind. "They have been in space for barely 300 of their years, and their territory is smaller than any of ours." "That is exactly why we should act now," Corax interrupted, leaning forward in his great chair with sudden interest, "before they grow any stronger and become a true threat to our interests in the outer sectors." Vethel raised his thin hands in a gesture that asked for patience and understanding. "Please, let me show you what I have learned," he said, and the holographic display changed to show images of Earth, the human homeworld. They call their planet Earth, and by the standards of the galaxy, it is what we would classify as a death world of the highest category. This caused some murmuring in the chamber, because death worlds were rare, and the species that came from them were usually simple and brutal. Their world has extreme temperature variations, dangerous predators on every continent, natural disasters that kill thousands regularly, and diseases that have wiped out huge portions of their population multiple times throughout their history. The images showed volcanoes erupting, hurricanes spinning across vast oceans, earthquakes splitting the ground apart, and Vethel let the council see all of it before continuing. "But here is what makes humans different from any other death world species we have ever encountered. They did not simply survive their world. They conquered it completely." He showed images of human cities, massive structures of metal and glass that stretched toward the sky, and roads that crossed entire continents and ships that sailed every ocean. Every predator that threatened them, they hunted to extinction or put in cages for their children to look at for entertainment. Corax laughed at this, but some of the other council members did not look so amused. "They evolved as what they call persistence predators," Vethel continued, "which means they would chase their prey for hours and sometimes days until the animal simply collapsed from exhaustion, and then they would kill it." "Interesting biology," said the Tholian representative in her clicking language. "But what does this have to do with whether they pose a threat to us?" Vethel turned to face her directly. "Because they bring that same persistence to everything they do, including war." He changed the display again, and now it showed records from human history, images of battles and conflicts that span thousands of years. In their history, they have fought wars that lasted for generations, wars where they burned entire cities to the ground and killed millions of their own kind over ideas and beliefs, and sometimes just for revenge. The chamber grew quieter now, and Vethal pressed forward with his argument. They have a concept called total war, which means a conflict where every resource of a society is directed toward the complete destruction of the enemy. And this concept has no equivalent in any other language I have studied. High Arbiter Corax made a dismissive gesture with one massive hand. All species fight wars, he said. The Vorn have conquered dozens of worlds, and we understand conflict better than most. With respect, High Arbiter, you do not understand this kind of conflict. The chamber went completely silent at this direct challenge to Corax, and even Vethal seemed surprised at his own boldness. The Vorn fight for territory and resources, he said quickly, as do the Kelthani and the Tholians and every other species represented here. And when the cost of a war becomes too high, you make peace and move on. He pulled up more images, these ones showing the aftermath of human conflicts, ruined cities, scarred landscapes, monuments to the dead that stretched for miles. Humans do not always make peace when the cost is too high, because sometimes they fight for something they call principle. And when they fight for principle, they will accept any cost, any sacrifice, any amount of destruction rather than surrender. You speak as if they are monsters, said Representative Mox. No, Vethal replied. I speak as if they are dangerous in ways we cannot predict or control. And I am begging this council to hear me when I say that we should not provoke them. Corax stood from his chair, his massive form towering over the chamber. The humans have resources we need, he declared, and their border worlds sit in space that rightfully belongs to the hegemony, and I will not let fear of primitives stop us from taking what is ours. They are not primitives, Vethal said, but his voice was growing desperate now. I call for a vote, Corax announced, ignoring the Solani completely, to authorize minor territorial adjustments in human space, to be carried out by hegemony forces with full council approval. The vote happened quickly, too quickly for Vethal to make any more arguments. And when it was done, 9 species had voted yes and only 3 had voted no. Corax smiled, his gray face splitting to reveal rows of sharp teeth. The motion passes, he said with satisfaction, and the hegemony thanks the council for its wisdom. Vethal stood alone on the speaking platform as the council members began to file out, his skin patterns now showing the deep purple of despair. And he knew with terrible certainty that he had just witnessed the beginning of something that would change the galaxy forever. He walked slowly back to his quarters on the station, his old legs feeling heavier than they had in years. And when he reached his private communication terminal, he sat down and composed a message to his homeworld. The message was short, and it was encrypted with the highest security protocols available to the Solani diplomatic corps. It said only this: evacuate the border systems immediately and prepare for the worst. The council has made its choice, and the galaxy is about to learn why humans should never be provoked. He sent the message and then sat in the darkness of his quarters for a long time, thinking about all the lives that would be lost because proud fools refused to listen to warnings. Somewhere out in the void of space, the humans continued their quiet existence on their small collection of worlds, unaware that a decision had just been made that would drag them into a war they had never wanted. And in the great council chamber, the floating orbs dimmed as the last representatives departed, leaving only shadows and silence and the echo of a warning that came too late to save anyone from what was coming. 6 weeks after the council vote, the colony world of New Helsinki woke to find alien warships filling its sky, and Governor Yuki Tanaka stood at her office window watching them descend through the clouds like metal gods coming to deliver judgment. New Helsinki was a small world, home to just under 2 million humans who had built their lives among the frozen forests and crystal lakes that covered most of the planet's surface. And they had never asked for war with anyone. The Vorn strike force consisted of 50 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could level cities in minutes. And Commander Threx stood on the bridge of his flagship feeling very pleased with himself. This would be an easy conquest, he thought, just like all the others the hegemony had carried out over the centuries. He opened a communication channel to the planet below and delivered the standard ultimatum in a bored voice that made it clear he expected immediate surrender. "People of this world," he announced, "you are now subjects of the Vorn hegemony by order of the Galactic Council, and you will submit to occupation forces within one planetary rotation or face the consequences." In her office, Governor Tanaka listened to the message and then looked at the faces of her advisors gathered around her, seeing fear and confusion and anger in equal measure. "How many ships do we have?" she asked her military commander. "3 patrol frigates and a dozen atmospheric fighters," he replied. "Nothing that can stand against a fleet that size." Tanaka nodded slowly and walked back to the window, watching the enemy ships take up positions in orbit around her world. "Begin civilian evacuations immediately," she ordered. "Every transport we have should be loading families and heading for the jump point within the hour." "And our defense forces?" the commander asked. Tanaka turned to face him with an expression that showed no fear at all, only a calm determination that made everyone in the room stand a little straighter. "We fight," she said simply. "We fight to give our people time to escape, and we make the Vorn pay for every kilometer of ground they take." The Battle of New Helsinki began 3 hours later when Vorn landing craft started descending toward the capital city, and they were met by everything the colonists could throw at them. The 3 frigates engaged the enemy fleet in orbit, knowing they could not win but determined to draw attention away from the fleeing evacuation transports that were racing towards safety. On the ground, colonial militia armed with whatever weapons they could find took positions in the streets and buildings of the capital, and they refused to retreat even when the Vorn troops began their advance. Commander Threx watched the battle unfold from his bridge with growing irritation, because this was supposed to be simple, and these humans were making it complicated. "Why do they not surrender?" he asked his tactical officer. "They cannot win, and they must know this." "Unknown, Commander," came the reply. "But our ground forces are taking heavier casualties than expected." The fighting lasted for 3 days. 3 impossible days, during which a handful of humans held back an army that should have crushed them in hours. Governor Tanaka broadcast messages to her people throughout the battle, her voice calm and steady, even as explosions shook the building around her. "We are not fighting because we can win," she said in one message that was recorded and would later be played across all of human space. "We are fighting because some things are worth fighting for even when victory is impossible." On the 4th day, Commander Threx lost his patience completely. He gave an order that would echo through history, an order that would be remembered long after his name was forgotten and his bones had turned to dust. "Target the capital city," he commanded, "and begin orbital bombardment." His officers looked at him with surprise, because orbital bombardment against a civilian population was considered extreme even by Vorn standards. "Commander, there are still non-combatants in the city," one of them said. "I do not care," Threx replied. "These humans have embarrassed me long enough, and if they will not surrender, then they will burn." The first energy beams from orbit struck the capital city at exactly noon local time, and within minutes the entire downtown core was nothing but fire and smoke and death. Governor Yuki Tanaka was still broadcasting when the beam hit her building, and her final words were transmitted to every human settlement within range. "Remember us," she said, just before the signal cut to static. "Remember what they did here, and never let them do it again." 60,000 humans died in the bombardment of New Helsinki, and when it was over, Commander Threx felt satisfied that he had taught these primitives a lesson they would not forget. He was right about that, though not in the way he expected. The news of New Helsinki reached Earth 12 hours later, carried by the few evacuation ships that had managed to escape, and the reaction was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. In the United Terran Assembly, the highest governing body of human civilization, representatives from every colony and station gathered in emergency session to watch the footage from New Helsinki. They saw their cities burning, saw their people dying, heard Governor Tanaka's final words echo through the great chamber like a ghost demanding justice. Admiral Marcus Chun stood before the assembly, his face showing no emotion at all, which somehow made him more frightening than if he had been screaming with rage. "The Vorn hegemony has attacked our people without provocation," he said in a voice that was completely flat and controlled. "They have killed 60,000 civilians, including Governor Tanaka, and they have done this with the approval of the Galactic Council." The chamber erupted in angry shouts and demands for action, but Chun raised his hand and waited for silence. "I have consulted with High Command," he continued, "and we are in agreement about what must be done." He took a deep breath and spoke words that would change the course of galactic history. "Activate the contingency." Across human space, in shipyards that had been officially closed for decades, lights began to turn on and machines began to move. In asteroid fields scattered throughout the outer colonies, ships that had been hidden and waiting for generations powered up their engines and began to emerge from their hiding places. Factories that had been producing civilian goods suddenly shifted to war production, and reserve units that had been training in secret received orders to mobilize. The Vorn hegemony thought they knew how strong humanity was, based on the small defensive fleet that humans had shown to the galaxy, that they had made a terrible mistake. Humans had learned long ago that the universe was dangerous, and they had never stopped preparing for the day when that danger would come for them. The fleet that began to gather in human space was 10 times larger than anyone outside humanity had ever suspected, and it was equipped with weapons that human scientists had been developing in secret laboratories for 300 years. Admiral Chun watched the reports come in as ship after ship reported ready for duty, and he felt a cold satisfaction in his heart. They wanted to know what humans are capable of, he said quietly to himself, and now they are going to find out. The evacuation ships from New Helsinki had carried survivors, but they had also carried something else, recordings of everything that had happened. Every moment of the battle, every word Commander Threx had spoken. Those recordings would be played for every human soldier before they went into battle, and they would remember. They would remember New Helsinki, and they would make the Vorn remember it too. The war had begun, and there would be no going back until it was finished. 3 months after the burning of New Helsinki, the Vorn hegemony learned what it truly meant to be at war with humanity. High Arbiter Korak sat in his throne room on the hegemony capital world, surrounded by advisors and generals who brought him nothing but bad news. And he could not understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. "Explain this to me again," he growled at his fleet commander. "How did we lose an entire supply convoy in our own space?" The fleet commander, a scarred veteran named Grath, who had served the hegemony for 40 years, looked at his leader with eyes that showed something Korax had never seen in a Vorn military officer before: fear. "The humans do not fight like any enemy we have faced," Grath said. "They do not engage our battle fleets directly. They do not try to hold territory. They do not follow any of the rules of warfare that we understand." "Then what do they do?" Korax demanded. Grath pulled up a holographic map showing hegemony space, and it was covered with red markers indicating attacks. "They appear from nowhere," he explained, "strike fast, destroy their targets, and vanish before our response fleets can arrive, and they target things we never expected." The map zoomed in on a system deep in hegemony territory, far from the front lines. "Last week, they destroyed every food processing facility in the Korath system," Grath continued. "They did not touch the military base or the shipyards, just the food production." Korax stared at the map in confusion. Why would they target food? He asked. That makes no tactical sense. Because now 50 million Vorn in that system are facing starvation, Grath replied quietly. And we have to divert supply ships from the war effort to feed them. Ships that should be carrying weapons and troops. The realization hit Korax like a physical blow, and he finally began to understand what Ambassador Vethel had tried to warn him about. They are not trying to defeat our military, he said slowly. They are trying to break our civilization. Grath nodded grimly. Every attack targets something that will cause maximum disruption. Water purification plants, power generation facilities, communication relays, transportation hubs, and always they leave the population alive, so we have to take care of them. Across hegemony space, the human strategy was working with devastating effectiveness. Admiral Chun had studied human history carefully, and he had learned lessons from conflicts that the Vorn had never imagined. He knew that wars were not won by destroying fleets. They were won by destroying the enemy's ability and will to fight. The human ghost ships were a perfect example of his strategy in action. Small vessels running completely silent, crewed by volunteers who knew they might never return, slipping deep into enemy territory to strike targets that would hurt the hegemony far more than any battle could. One ghost ship captain, a woman named Lieutenant Commander Sarah Okonkwo, had become famous among the human forces for her daring raids. Her ship, the Silent Blade, had destroyed 3 Vorn orbital factories, 2 major power plants, and a communications hub that had taken the hegemony decades to build. After each attack, she would broadcast a recording of Governor Tanaka's final words on all Vorn frequencies, making sure they never forgot why this war had started. On the hegemony throne world, Korax made a decision that showed how desperate he had become. Contact the Galactic Council, he ordered. Demand that they intervene on our behalf. The message went out to Axiom Prime, and the Council convened an emergency session to hear the hegemony's plea for help. Ambassador Vethel sat in the observer gallery, watching as Korax's representative begged the same council that had authorized this war to now stop it. But the other species were not interested in helping the Vorn anymore. The Solani had withdrawn all their ships to their home systems and closed their borders to everyone. The Kelthani Federation suddenly discovered that they had a treaty dispute with the hegemony that needed to be resolved before they could offer any assistance. The Tholians announced that they were strictly neutral and would not take sides in what they called an internal matter. One by one, the species that had voted to authorize the attack on New Helsinki found reasons why they could not possibly help the hegemony now that the humans were fighting back. Korax's representative returned home with nothing but empty promises and meaningless diplomatic gestures. In his throne room, Korax raged against the cowardice of his former allies. But deep down he knew the truth. They were not cowards. They were simply smart enough to see which way the wind was blowing. He decided to try a different approach and sent envoys directly to the human government, offering to negotiate a peace settlement. The humans received the envoys politely, listened to their proposals, and then sent them back with a message. The message was written in Latin, an ancient Earth language, and Korax had to have it translated by his intelligence services. When he read the translation, his gray face went pale. Ceterum censeo hegemonia esse delendum. Furthermore, I considered that the hegemony must be destroyed. It was a reference to human history, to a civilization called Rome that had used those words to express their absolute determination to wipe out an enemy called Carthage. And Rome had succeeded, completely and utterly, until Carthage was nothing but ruins and memory. Korax finally understood what he was facing. Not an enemy that wanted territory or resources or political concessions, but an enemy that would accept nothing less than his total destruction. The war continued to go badly for the hegemony, and with each passing week, more systems fell into chaos. Human forces captured a Vorn military communication station and discovered something that Admiral Chun had suspected but not confirmed. The order to bombard New Helsinki had been recorded. Commander Threx's voice, calmly ordering the deaths of 60,000 civilians, was broadcast across the entire galaxy. Suddenly, other species began to look at the Vorn differently, and trade agreements that had been in place for centuries were quietly cancelled. The hegemony was being isolated, strangled slowly by an enemy that never stopped, never rested, and never forgot. In the Great Council chamber on Axiom Prime, Ambassador Vethel watched the war reports with a mixture of horror and grim satisfaction. He had warned them, he had begged them to listen, and now they were all learning the lesson he had tried to teach. A young Kelthani diplomat approached him one evening and asked a question that many were thinking, but few dared to speak aloud. "How does this end?" The diplomat asked, "What will the humans do when they have defeated the hegemony?" Vethal considered the question carefully before answering. "That depends on what we do now," he said. "The humans are not monsters. They are not conquerors seeking empire. They are simply people who were attacked and are now fighting back with everything they have. But surely they will stop eventually." The diplomat pressed. Vethel shook his head slowly. "They will stop when they feel safe," he replied. "And right now, after what happened at New Helsinki, they do not feel safe at all. And until they do, this war will continue." The diplomat walked away looking troubled, and Vethel returned to watching the reports, knowing that the worst was yet to come. The galaxy had awakened something that should have been left sleeping, and now everyone would pay the price for the hegemony's arrogance. The war entered its second year, and the Vorn hegemony that had once been the most feared military power in 3 sectors was falling apart from the inside. On a dozen worlds, Vorn citizens rioted in the streets demanding that their government make peace with the humans. But there was no peace to be made. High Arbiter Korax had aged 20 years in the past 12 months. His gray skin now showing patches of sickly white that indicated extreme stress. And he spent his days in his throne room surrounded by fewer and fewer advisors as one, after another, found reasons to be elsewhere. The human strategy had worked exactly as Admiral Chun had planned it. They had not tried to conquer Vorn worlds or defeat Vorn fleets in great battles. They had simply made it impossible for the hegemony to function as a civilization. Supply lines were so disrupted that some Vorn worlds had not received shipments in months. Communication networks were so damaged that orders from the capital sometimes took weeks to reach their destinations. The economy had collapsed so completely that Vorn currency was worthless and people had returned to bartering for basic necessities. And still the human ghost ships kept coming, appearing without warning to strike another target before vanishing back into the darkness of space. Ambassador Vethelo received a secret message asking him to attend a meeting with representatives from 6 council species, and he went knowing that something important was about to happen. The meeting took place in a private room far from the main council chamber, and when Vethel entered, he found 6 worried faces looking back at him. "We need your help," said the Kelthani representative. "You are the only one who seems to understand the humans, and we need to know. How do we stop this?" Vethel sat down heavily in a chair and looked at each of them in turn. "You cannot stop it," he said finally. "You cannot make deals with them. You cannot threaten them. You cannot do anything that will end this war before the humans decide it is over." "There must be something," the Tholian representative clicked anxiously. "There is one thing," Vethal replied. "You can make sure they feel safe. You can show them that the galaxy will never threaten them again, but that will require changes to how the Council operates." He leaned forward with sudden intensity. "It will require admitting that what was done to New Helsinki was wrong. It will require punishing those responsible. It will require creating laws with real consequences for aggression against peaceful species. The representatives looked at each other uncomfortably, because what Vethel was describing would mean giving up power they had held for centuries. On Earth, a different kind of debate was happening. In the streets of major cities, crowds gathered to protest the continuation of the war, carrying signs that said, "Enough," and "Peace now," and "We are not monsters." Admiral Chun was called before the United Terran Assembly to answer questions about his conduct of the campaign. He walked into the great chamber looking older than his years, his shoulders bent under a weight that only he could feel, and he stood before the representatives of humanity to account for what he had done. "Admiral Chun," the assembly speaker began, "there are those who say that our campaign against the hegemony has gone too far, that we have become the aggressors, that we have lost our way. How do you respond?" Chun was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Every night I see the faces of the people we have killed," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I see the Vorn children who are hungry because we destroyed their food supplies. I see the families torn apart by our attacks. And I carry that weight with me every single day." He looked up at the assembly with eyes that held no plea for understanding, only a terrible certainty. "But I also see the faces of the 60,000 who died at New Helsinki. I hear Governor Tanaka's voice asking us to remember. And I know that if we stop now, if we show weakness, there will be another New Helsinki." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "I have become what they forced me to become, and I will carry that weight so that no human child will ever have to watch their world burn while alien warships fill the sky." The assembly was silent, and Chun walked out knowing that history would judge him, for better or worse. While humanity debated with itself, Arbiter Korax made one final desperate decision. He gathered every warship the hegemony had left, 300 vessels that represented the last of Vorn military power, and he sent them on a mission that would either win the war or end it forever. "If we cannot defeat their fleets," Korax said to his commanders, "then we will strike at their heart. We will attack Earth itself and force them to surrender." The Vorn fleet used secret jump routes that bypassed human-held space, traveling for weeks through dangerous regions of the galaxy that ships normally avoided. When they finally emerged from their last jump, they found themselves in the Sol System, the home of humanity, and Commander Grath, who led the fleet, felt a moment of triumph. That moment lasted exactly 3 seconds. The human home fleet emerged from behind the moon, from within asteroid fields, from positions around every planet and moon in the system, and Grath realized with horror that they had been expected. 2,000 human warships, each one armed with weapons that made the Vorn fleet look like toys, surrounded his force completely. Earth's moon, which long-range scans had always shown as a peaceful mining colony, suddenly bristled with weapons platforms that had been hidden for 2 centuries. Admiral Chun's voice came over the communication channel, calm and cold. "Commander Grath, you are surrounded. Your fleet cannot escape. Your weapons cannot penetrate our defenses, and if you fire a single shot, not one of your ships will survive." Grath looked at the tactical display and knew that Chun was not bluffing. "But I want you to know something before you die," Chen continued. "We did not want this war. We did not ask for it. We simply wanted to live in peace with our neighbors." "You could surrender," Grath said, knowing it was hopeless. "No," Chen replied, "we could not. Because if we surrendered today, someone else would attack us tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, until there were no humans left." "Then fire and be done with it," Grath said quietly. "I will," Chun answered. "But first I want you to send a message to whatever is left of the hegemony. Tell them that this is what we were trying to avoid. Tell them that we kept this fleet hidden because we hoped we would never have to use it." The battle lasted less than an hour, and when it was over, not a single Vorn ship remained. The humans did not celebrate their victory. There were no cheers, no celebrations, no triumphant speeches. Instead, They broadcast the destruction across the galaxy with a simple message that every species would remember. This is what we were trying to avoid. Do not make us do it again. On the Hegemony throne world, Korax watched the footage of his fleet's destruction, and something inside him finally broke. His own people, seeing that their last hope was gone, rose up against him, and before the day was over, High Arbiter Korax was dead at the hands of those he had once ruled. The Vorn Hegemony, which had terrorized the galaxy for 1,000 years, had fallen, and the galaxy would never be the same again. 1 year after the destruction of the Vorn fleet at Earth, the Galactic Council gathered once again in the Great Chamber on Axiom Prime, but everything had changed. The floating orbs still cast their light over the assembled representatives. The polished floor still reflected their images back at them, but the feeling in the room was completely different from before. 11 species sat in their traditional seats, arranged in a great circle around the central speaking platform, but one seat stood empty. The Vorn seat, where High Arbiter Korax had once sat in his ceremonial armor, was dark and silent, a reminder of what happened to those who started wars they could not finish. The Vorn Hegemony had shattered into 17 small factions after Korax's death, each one too weak and too busy fighting the others to threaten anyone for generations. But the empty seat was not the biggest change in the chamber. At the very center, where no species had ever been invited to stand before, a human delegation waited to address the council. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood at the front of the delegation, her dark hair touched with gray at the temples, despite her relatively young age. And she looked at the assembled representatives with eyes that showed neither fear nor anger. She was the daughter of Admiral Marcus Chun, who had retired from military service after the war ended. And she had been chosen to represent humanity because she understood both the cost of war and the price of peace. Honored members of the Galactic Council, she began, her voice steady and clear. Humanity thanks you for this invitation to address your assembly. The chamber was completely silent as she spoke. 3 years ago, a decision was made in this very chamber to authorize an attack on human space. And when my people tried to defend ourselves, 60,000 innocent civilians were killed in the bombardment of New Helsinki. She paused to let those words sink in. We did not want the war that followed. We did not seek it, and we took no pleasure in what we had to do to end it. But we will not apologize for defending our people against aggression. Some of the representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke. Governor Yuki Tanaka's last words were "Remember us." And we have remembered. We will always remember. But we have not come here today to talk about the past. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. We have come to talk about the future, about what kind of galaxy we want to live in, about how we can make sure that what happened to New Helsinki never happens to anyone again. She gestured to her delegation, and one of them stepped forward carrying a document. Humanity proposes to join this council as a full and equal member, not to dominate or to dictate, but to participate in building something better than what we have now. The document was projected into the air for all to see. In exchange for our membership, we ask for the adoption of new laws. Laws against unprovoked aggression. Laws protecting species that cannot protect themselves. Laws with real consequences for those who break them. The Kelthani representative leaned forward with a worried expression. And if these laws are not adopted? He asked. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. Then humanity will withdraw to our own space. We will close our borders, and we will wait. And the next species that decides to test our resolve will not receive a second chance. The silence in the chamber was so complete that the hum of the floating orbs above seemed loud. But we hope it will not come to that, Sarah added, her voice softening slightly, because we believe that the galaxy can be better than it has been. That we can build something together that none of us could build alone. The vote took place immediately, and it was unanimous. Every species, even those who had voted to authorize the attack on New Helsinki 3 years before, agreed to humanity's terms. The new laws were adopted. Humanity took its place on the council. And for the first time in galactic history, there were rules that every species had to follow. As the session ended and representatives began to file out of the chamber, Ambassador Vethel approached Sarah Chun. He looked even older than he had at the start of the war, his translucent skin showing patterns of deep blue that indicated profound weariness. But his eyes were still sharp and curious. "May I ask you something, Ambassador Chun?" he said. "Of course," Sarah replied. Vethel hesitated, as if trying to find the right words for a question that had haunted him for years. "Did humanity plan this?" He finally asked, "Did you know, when you kept your true fleet hidden, when you developed weapons in secret, did you know what you would become if someone pushed you too far?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the empty chamber where so much history had been made. "We hoped we would never have to find out," she said at last. "We hoped that the galaxy would leave us alone, that we could grow and develop in peace, but we knew that hope was not enough." She turned to face Vethel directly. "My father once told me that the universe is not kind, that it does not care about justice or fairness or the dreams of small creatures on their tiny worlds, and that the only protection against the darkness is the strength to face it." "So you were always ready for war," Vethel said. "We were always ready to survive," Sarah corrected him. "There is a difference. We did not build our fleet because we wanted to conquer anyone. We built it because we knew that someday someone would come for us. And we were determined to still be here when they were gone." Vethel considered her words carefully. "I tried to warn them," he said finally. "I stood in this very chamber and begged them not to provoke your people, but they would not listen." "I know," Sarah replied. "We have records of your speech, and there are many in my government who consider you a friend because of it." The old Solani's skin flickered with surprise at this revelation. "I do not deserve such honor," he said. "I failed to prevent the war." "You tried," Sarah said, "and that matters more than you know." She began to walk away, then stopped and turned back. "Ambassador Vethel, there is one more thing I want you to understand about my people." He waited silently for her to continue. "We are not conquerors. We are not monsters. We are not the villains that some in the galaxy feared we would become. We are simply survivors, and survivors do whatever they must to keep surviving." "And now that you have survived?" Vethel asked. Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. "Now we build," she said. "Now we grow. Now we try to make the galaxy a place where no one has to be afraid. Not humans, not Solani, not even the Vorn." She walked away, leaving Vethel alone in the great chamber. He stood there for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened and everything that was yet to come. The galaxy had been warned about humanity, and it had not listened, and now it would never forget. But perhaps, Vethel thought as he finally turned to leave, perhaps that was not such a bad thing after all. Perhaps a galaxy that remembered what humans could do when provoked would be a galaxy that worked a little harder to solve its problems without violence. Perhaps the lesson of New Helsinki would save more lives than it had cost. He hoped so, because the alternative was too terrible to contemplate. Outside the station, the stars burned cold and eternal, witnesses to the rise and fall of civilizations beyond counting. And somewhere among them, humanity continued its journey. No longer alone, no longer afraid, ready to face whatever the universe might send. The warning had been given, the lesson had been learned, and the galaxy would remember.